very special friend of the group. He's enabled many of our travels. Many of our spouses and partners probably don't like this gentleman for all that he's allowed us to do, but for the many happy returns, I think they're all thankful. So welcome, James Willcox of Untamed Borders.
Hi, Stefan. Thanks for having me on.
One of the trips that I'm most envious of, and I'll share the links because you did a wonderful talk about it. But talk about the lighthouse on the tip of the Horn of Africa. That'll get us dreaming of the travels that we wish we were doing and hope to do again soon.
Well, I think it's one of, without repeating the entire talk. You know, we've all got places that we saw. We read an article on, like, you know, as a teenager or when we were traveling, someone, especially before all of the sort of everything was everywhere over the internet. You'd meet someone who told you about a little village where there was a sky burial, or there was this sort of small place, this little temple which wasn't in the Lonely Planet, all these kind of things. Mm-hmm. And it was like it was a real adventure, you know, to go and visit one of these places or to try and get there. And before I was involved in travel in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, I was working with a guy, and he used to work in the Merchant Navy, and he said that there was a lighthouse on the tip of the Horn of Africa, which was the worst posting in the British Empire, and that people were there for 2 years. 3 men were dropped off there by boat for 2 years. Every 6 months, some supplies would come, and they couldn't leave. There was no way they could get out by sea. And going inland, there were deserts and dangerous tribes and all these kind of things. And it was just kind of evocative, and I always sort of kept thinking about it. I mean, it turned out to be complete rubbish. I mean, it wasn't true, this story about the worst place in the British Empire, but there was a lighthouse there. And when we started doing trips to Somaliland and started doing trips to Mogadishu, we had a small group of 3 people who said, what about trips to Puntland? I mean, this was before all of these kind of dividing the country up into 26,000 sort of sections and things like that. But it was a kind of precursor to that. They were like, well, Puntland's semi-autonomous, we'd like to go there. And I knew a guy who'd worked with development organizations and oil exploration companies, and that we could, you know, he'd arranged some armed security. We did some risk assessments. There was a British guy I know, who actually wrote the Brat Guidebook for Equatorial Guinea. He'd done his PhD research on tribal regions of Somalia. So with all of this kind of different backup, we put together a bit of a trip, and I started talking to them about this lighthouse, and it grasped their imagination. And that's kind of how we set off. And, you know, it was a big adventure. Some stuff was stolen by some militias. We had to like travel for a day in an open boat over the Red Sea. It was a big kind of adventure to get there, but we did finally visit this lighthouse, which turned out to be the largest remaining Italian fascist symbol in the world.
Incredible. And subsequently, is it more accessible over the coming years? Or is it?
We've arranged
in general on the wish list. Yeah.
I mean, we've arranged a few trips, especially with the dividing the world up into more pieces. We've arranged more people's short trips to Puntland, but that was really needed a week. You know, once those who have travelled to southern parts of Somalia know that once you start adding the security details and things like that, it does become quite expensive. So we've guided 2 other groups to the lighthouse since then. And as far as I'm aware, that's pretty much it. I mean, it's still a pretty remote area. It's a good 2 days travel from Bosaso or from Garowe, the biggest main sort of towns. And it's remote, and, you know, you need your security detail to go out there. So I don't think it's heavily, it's not over touristed.
I know you get there, and there's one other tourist that's like there's always the tall Norwegian guy looking, and you're like, darn, I just thought I finally got one.
Yeah, it's like Scott and what's it, Elmondson in the Antarctic, isn't it? Yeah, you think you've got there, and someone else has already pitched their flag.
Anna in the comments was referring to your chameleon ability. She said you look different every time she sees your moving image, whether in the flesh or on video. So it's true.
Yeah, there's three of me. We look quite alike, and like one does the media, one does the trips, and one answers the emails. So that's how we managed to do it. Yeah.
That's the inside look, and we will talk a bit about James's business as he as he puts back a few more sips of the drink and continues to open up. But let's stay in greater Somalia, we'll say, and Marathon Somaliland. You've gotten into sporting events in Somaliland and Afghanistan and Iraq. Let's talk about putting on a marathon. It seems like an incredible logistical challenge, even in a place that's normally accustomed to such events.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long story of how we got involved in how Untamed Borders and I got involved in the races. But basically, for those that know me, 2011 we started doing sort of ski trips to Afghanistan, and at the same time, completely separately, a Swiss guy, he was stuck in Bamiyan in central Afghanistan the year before, and he swore to himself he'd come back with a bunch of skis and set up a ski race, mainly for his own kind of amusement. You know, he's written a couple of books of doing crazy things in crazy places. I think people on EPS some of them can understand that. And his idea of putting on a ski race in Afghanistan appealed to that. But when he came back to put on the ski race, we were organising ski trips. And that was the start of the Afghan Ski Challenge, which was in its 10th year this winter, which is a ski race in Afghanistan. And after doing that for a couple of years, the next obvious step was to organise another kind of sporting event. And a running race, a marathon, makes a lot of sense because you don't need a lot to do it. You don't need to learn to ski. You don't need much equipment. You basically need, I know you're saying it takes a lot. It does take a lot to organize, but basically you need volunteers, some vehicles, a bunch of water, some food, and a lot of faith and a little bit of money. That's what you need to organize a marathon. I'll tell you what, it's an easy day guiding because people make their own amusement. They run 26 miles and feel amazing at the end of it for some reason. And it's actually, you know, it's great, and it's great to organize. And in Afghanistan, we got involved in an organisation called Free to Run, who organise safe spaces for women to do sport in post-conflict countries. And actually, since then, I'm now on the board of Free to Run, and so it became the first and still only mixed gender sporting event in Afghanistan. And for further reasons, a guy got in touch with me in Somaliland a couple of years after that, and he was interested in doing something similar in Somaliland. So this February, actually, my last sort of trip was for the 3rd annual Somaliland Marathon. And it's got some write-ups in the Independent and in the New York Times and some other things as well if people want to have more information about that. And certainly in Somaliland, I mean, you know, and in Afghanistan, I mean, for women, there really aren't places for people to be able to do sport and keep fit. And so, yeah, to be able to do something that, you know, it's not for me. It's not for like a middle-aged white guy to come over to Somaliland and say, this is how your society needs to run. But it's to organize an event and say, look, it's open for people to run. And it acts as a sort of catalyst for people to look at what is possible and what isn't. I mean, effectively, it's the same as being, you know, it's just moving a bit faster. There isn't anything so crazy about running a race that women can't do otherwise. But in Somaliland, I mean, look, I've only been threatened to be put in jail twice for organising this race, and so ultimately, it's not you know, there's always problems that come up with organising things like this, but generally it's good.
And there's some questions about Afghanistan. We'll canter over that way. But before that, I don't want to leave the Horn of Africa broadly because I think it is a region that even a lot of the more adventurous travelers don't necessarily go beyond tick the box style visits. So let's talk about broadly Eritrea, Djibouti, and however you want to divvy up Somalia. What are some of the ultimate wish list items that security and costs allowing should be on people's lists?
In Somalia, I mean, we really want to do. We've been close a couple of times to organise like a filming surfing trip in Somalia, both in and around Mogadishu and Puntland as well. There's some quite good breaks on the Indian Ocean coast. That would be something It's one of the things that is probably the most fun part of my job is when we have like a small documentary team and they want to do something in one of these areas, and I get to go out and kind of help organize it and get to see people who are, you know, really talented in their field do stuff. So I'm really excited that we hopefully one day one of these projects will come off. So I'd say that would be really good. Kismayo, people have started wanting to go to Kismayo because I think one of these country divisional website things has decided that Jubaland is a region, and therefore people wanted to go to Kismayo. But at exactly the same time as it was decided that Kismayo should be a place, Kismayo decided it didn't want to become part of Somalia. So it's kind of separated a little bit away from the Mogadishu government. So it's quite tricky to go there. So we did have to take people to a town called Baidao because they'd organized to go to Kismayo, and Baidao was kind of like a plan B. Baidao it's kind of the agricultural center of Somalia. It's sort of inland from Mogadishu, and the groups we took there last year were, I think, the first tourists since like the 80s. That's what the president of Southwest State, which Baidao is the capital of, said. And they were really excited about tourism going there, but I mean, it's just not. There's just not going to be unless one of Nomad Mania decides that Southwest State is a separate region. I don't think it's going to see a huge amount more. But yeah, other places to go. We take people to Ale on the Indian Ocean coast in Puntland, which is really beautiful. Actually, all of the coastline is amazing in Puntland. And once you get up to Puntland, some of the cliffs, they rise like a kilometer out of the sea. You know, people have this image of Somalia being kind of flat, arid, but you have these huge cliffs coming out of the sea in Puntland, these highlands where I'm also trying to put together something. I don't think it's ever going to happen because they don't have the money, but the Kew Gardens in London, which are kind of the botanical, the famous sort of botanical gardens there. There's a couple of plant experts who have listed these highlands in Puntland. There's a number of indigenous plants which were recorded in the 80s or the 70s but haven't been seen since, and they're very keen to go out there and see if they still exist. I'd love to try and get involved in something like that.
It reminds me of my trip to Eritrea. I met a gentleman, I think from Czech Republic, that yeah, he was a botanist and interested in some specific plants. Tell me about the Danakil Depression. I haven't been. I have images in my mind. I want to go.
The Danakil Depression is amazing. I mean, you've seen the pictures, and it is like the pictures. I mean, the camel caravans that carry the salt, which, if you add up how much they say they sell the salt for, and how much the camels worth, and how long it takes them to get from where they chip away the salt to where they sell it at market, they'll have to, you know, those camels are going to have to live for about 300 years to make the finances work. But I mean, all of the stuff, the acid lakes, the you know, the yellow rocks, to Allah, like ever since it kind of collapsed a little bit, it's not the same sort of lava sea that it used to be. But it's just an amazing place, and it's worth. It is otherworldly. I mean, you've got a lot of, and just with the heat and everything, it is feel like you are being taken out of your life and put somewhere that's a bit rough. And it doesn't matter how you do it; it is rough, and it's kind of a bit like some, you know, proper traveling. Like you have to suffer a little bit in the Danakil Depression, but the rewards are great. So it's definitely worth doing.
And what is the time you need to allow for a reasonable visit?
That's a good question, because they put in the new they put in this new road. Like it used to be, oh God, I can't even remember now. I think you used to really have to do 4 days, but you can kind of do it in 3 days. We organized a group from Singapore who mountain biked across the Danakil Depression in, God, when was it? Must have been 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago. And, you know, sometimes some people come to us with, you know, an idea for a trip. It's like a cycling trip across the Danakil Depression. And you look at it, you think, you know, maybe this could turn into like a group trip that individuals can join and things like that. This, absolutely not. We would never do it again. it's like it's insane trying to cycle across the Danica Depression. I mean, obviously the heat, the heat, like the sulfurous smoke, just the intensity of it. I mean, it was pretty nuts.
Thinking the time when I was, I think it was in Uzbekistan, crossing down into Tajikistan or something, and I was just the car. I was in a car with a somewhat functioning AC, and I see some biker. I forget what European flag was on his bike. Just looked so miserable, covered in dust. You know, presumably, I don't know. Probably drove cycling from Amsterdam to Beijing. I don't know what he was. It was probably one of those, and I just thought this really is that so was cycling across the Danakil Depression. I guess the trip did go off. Was that one of the most insane in your estimation, or
I think
you got even crazier ones that haven't
I
happened?
think physically. I mean, insanity depends on what it is, but
Yeah.
physically, that was tough. I mean, a bunch of the group kind of got heat stroke. Yeah, I mean, we probably bit off without trying to suggest that our risk assessments ahead of time were not completely adequate. We possibly bit off a little bit more than we could chew in agreeing to organise that. And the places where actually the good thing about that trip was because they were cycling across, we set up the camps and stuff for where they go. Whereas often if you go in a group, you stay at these kind of designated campsites, which are like these small towns, and they're pretty grim. They're pretty grim places. It's not a luxury experience.
To talk about, you mentioned risk assessment. So, and then Hemo has a question about Hadramaut, Yemen. I guess it sounds like he was planning a trip with you for that. So talk about
Yeah. Dr. Himo has been on a number of trips. In fact, he was on the first trip where we went to Puntland. He was on that trip with the to the lighthouse. Yeah, they should have been going to the Hadramaut region of Yemen. We started doing some trips there at the end of last year, crossing in from Oman. And either heading down the coast and cutting through the Wadi Dawan region into the Hadramaut and then back across the desert, or vice versa. And yeah, I think I don't have my. I have no idea what trips were supposed to be going on at this time. I've kind of. I mean, I know what's going on in the future, and we've moved people that were booked on trips to later dates and all of this kind of things. But usually, I know almost all the time exactly what trips we've got. Most of the trips that we've got going on at any time in the world. But I've kind of forgotten about what we were supposed to be doing this time. But yeah, so Jaime should have been there at this moment, but he's not. But no one's got any fear of missing out because no one can travel. So that's the positive thing.
Yeah, and mainland Yemen, I've been to Socotra, but not the mainland, and I haven't wanted the ticky tap day trip, and I've also going back to the security theme. I also feel like people that go to a place, a number of travelers have reported in EPS they've gone across different parts of mainland Yemen, and I always feel like the conclusion that nothing happened, so it's safe, doesn't quite sit with me. It's nothing happened means nothing happened, and so how do you're not only thinking about yourself, but you're thinking about clients, what risk you're putting other people in, business risk as well as personal. So how do you start thinking about security?
Well, I mean, whether it's the risk when we talk about the Danakil Depression, which is something you're doing a physical activity, so you talk about heat stroke, you're talking about what are the risks to the people on the trip, like road traffic accidents, all of these kind of things. And so we look at what we can do, what those risks are. It's like with any risk assessment. It's the likelihood of the risk multiplied by the severity of the risk. So if it's, you go to India, likelihood of one of a group of 20 people getting some sort of stomach problems is pretty high, but the severity is pretty low. So you can tell people to wash their hands and stuff to reduce it. And even if you didn't tell them to wash their hands, it's not the end of the world. So it's the severity multiplied by the likelihood, and then we look at what we can do to reduce it. So in somewhere like the Danakil Depression, there are issues. There was less than 3 years ago, there was a German guy with his guide was killed by the Afar on the Danakil Depression. But the thing is, he went without going through the proper the proper process with having the FR people traveling with you and all of this kind of thing. So we look at the risks, we look at what's done to reduce those risks. And so, yeah, with mainland Yemen, when we knew that it was possible to go over there in, like, I think about 2017, is we looked at what was going on there, the security reports that we get from sort of development agencies that work in the area. I work, because I've done a lot of work in and around sort of Kabul. I have fairly good links with sort of conflict journalists, with people who worked in development agencies, with these kind of people, and they have security reports which I kind of get some access to. And so there's an external sort of security assessment that we can do. Plus, there's looking at the guys that we work with, what their assessment is, and once we travel somewhere as well, we pick up other contacts as well. So we can use all of those sources to assess the risk, and then put in some things in place to further reduce the risk of where we travel.
And it seems a key link is finding the local partners and fixtures. I've been your customer, a paying customer on 2 trips, one for Afghanistan, one for Somalia, Mogadishu. And I remember for Mogadishu, because of flight mechanical delays for a rather short trip, did missed a full day of the sightseeing. So on the spot, it was with the fixer on the ground deciding how much of that day could be recovered at nighttime, which isn't normally the time you go touring around Mogadishu. So it was interesting, and getting that window into the different security calculations of what was possible on the fly and what wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember you got your sunset tour of Mogadishu, didn't you, Stefan?
Yeah. And they I don't know. I don't think it's one of those, like they say, this is the only rooftop carpet vendor in Istanbul. I've shown you this hidden secret that's people have been there 1,000 times this month. I think that they really said that was the first time that is a few years ago that they were willing to do the city tour at night, and it worked out. It was a beautiful evening, but each step of the way it was very much recalibrating what could or couldn't be. We've got a question. Staying on the African continent, we've got a question about Darfur opening up from Reinhard is asking about Darfur.
I mean, it's a bit like I talked about the lighthouse in Puntland. There's it's a mountain basically called Jebel Mara in Darfur. It's basically a dormant volcano. So it has the caldera, the big caldera outside, and inside it's got kind of 2 lakes, and it's the highest mountain in the Sahel. And I've always wanted to go there for whatever reason, and I know that under the previous Sudanese regime, I forget the guy's name. That area was really where the rebels in Darfur that were backed by Chad. That was an area that they were, so you couldn't really go in from Sudan. There was a guy I know this through a Dutch journalist. The Chad rebels were supported through an organization, not officially but unofficially in Europe, where I tried to speak to them to see if I could come in via Chad and go to see. This is a number of years ago, but it just it would have been for me. It wouldn't have been a commercial group, because it was pretty sketchy to go into Darfur with a rebel group. But I kept in touch with things because I really wanted to do it. And since the new regime has come in Sudan, I mean, it's been there about a year, and the group of people who are now sort of ruling Sudan include some of the people who were the sort of rebels in Darfur. They are not exactly part of the government, but they are sort of with this new kind of coalition, and so it seems kind of on. I know there's a few people really interested in going to Jebel Mara. I've got a small kind of tentative group of people, so when travel starts again, That's the plan.
And Devjit's asking, has Kinyeti ever been climbed?
Kinyeti's the one in South Sudan, yeah?
Yep, yep, that's what.
I think so, yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it has. It's not that big. It's not technical.
Huh. And Michael's
But
asking, what's the
don't
youngest?
quote me on that. Don't quote me on that.
Okay, what's the youngest participant you've had on a trip? And he traveled with
Um,
his kids to a lot of places, so there's probably a reason behind that question.
oh wait, for private trips with guided families, I can't remember, but like maybe 12 or 10 or something. For anyone under 18, we produce another document. I mean, we generally don't, we'd have to really know people if they joined like a group trip. But for a
Mm.
private trip, I mean, we're absolutely fine. We've done family trips to places. We do get the parents to sign an additional document
Mm.
because we were talking about risk assessments before. People who are under the age of 18 are seen as being minors and therefore necessarily can't make their own decisions. So if you take them to Afghanistan, the parents have to be kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
we are making that choice on their behalf. You can't just get the under 18-year-old to sign the terms and conditions like with anyone else. But apart from that, yeah, I mean, if there was a family wanting to go to Afghanistan and go to Bamiyan, we've done that before. We've taken the families trekking in Tajikistan. We've done, yeah, various things. I mean, we'd generally discuss it. I mean, it would have to be interesting. I think go to Bamiyan in Afghanistan, kids would love that. There's loads of old forts to climb around. There's the lakes. There's all of that kind of stuff. I think some of the places where um, security is in a high risk security, and you're not out and about that much. You're traveling in car from place to place. You're getting out, seeing an old historical site or two. I mean, I don't know how much interest that would be to somebody's kids, but yeah, plenty of like a few of the places we've taken families.
Michael's kids are 3.5 and 8 years old, so he's saying he may have to wait, but maybe that Tajikistan trip would be
Which Michael?
Michael Wasserman. He's out of Brooklyn, a friend of mine.
Okay. I mean, he knows what his kids like. I mean, no two kids are kind of the same, are they? I imagine if he's talking to me about traveling with his kids are probably quite, yeah, quite good.
Yeah, and he's a special education educator, so he has, I guess, some professional insight. And I don't have kids. I've always felt like a kid might be a good souvenir in a lot of countries as travel. I mean, all the attention will just swarm onto kids, and they'll be doted. Um, let's let's see. The minaret of jam is let's see. I'm going through the questions. I've been skirting over Afghanistan, but let's head right into Afghanistan. So
Okay.
minaret of jam prospects for the future travel.
Minaret of Jam. We get asked a lot about the Minaret of Jam. Um, so I went to the Minaret of Jam in 2008. The last trip Untamed Borders did was in 2009. Ever since then, we've looked at it on a fairly regular basis, and we've always felt that the security for us it's a red line. You talked about risk assessments before.
Mm-hmm.
In Gore province, where the Minaret of Jam is, there are anti-government groups. There are anti-government groups that control the road. They will do illegal checkpoints, or they stop and tax minibuses. Probably from about like 2010 to 2016, we knew that another company that worked in Afghanistan was doing their trips every year to the Minaret of Jam. And when a competitor is doing something and you're not, we're like, are we missing something here? Are they doing something that we don't? Do they know something? We found, knew the drivers that they were using. We kind of knew people that had been on those trips, so got an idea of from the guests what was going on. Now the guests don't always know what's going on, or they sometimes think they know what's going on, but they don't know what's going on, or they sometimes do know what's going on. Because tourism is, you kind of create
That's the most British
you
sounding
create
tour
the
operator
narrative.
quote I've ever heard, I think.
What was that? The you create a bit of a like the narrative, especially if you've got a group in like a high risk area. You want everyone to act as a team, so you
Yeah.
set out how it's going to be. And yeah, and at some point they did get attacked, and I know a couple of people that were on that trip. I know the driver who's I don't know that I don't know that well. I've met him once, but the guys I work with in Afghanistan know the guy whose high ace van was burnt out. And yeah, I mean, look, something can happen. Like something can happen to any operator at any time, especially if you're working in a high risk place. You know, that's not to say one operator is bad and one is good because something happened to them. I think with like young pioneers, for example, they had someone on their trip who got whatever arrested and then had, you know, sadly died. It doesn't mean that operator is good or bad. We all have our good or bad days. But we'd stopped working there in 2009, and there's no real satisfaction that you make a risk assessment and you know you make it and it happens to somebody else, because it's sad and it could have been a lot worse. But at the minute of jump, it's still the same. It's still the same situation. I mean, look, you could fly to Chakcharan, you could hire a guy, you could go out there. If you went by yourself, you spoke a bit of Dari, you sat in the back of the van, you'd probably be okay. But that's not good enough for us. So no, minute of jam. No.
And he was also asking about Kala E Bust, and then the logistics, fly, drive, and security situation for Bamiyan, which you said you've taken families to.
Kala E Bust, which is in Helmand province. It's just outside of oh my god, it's late. I can't remember.
I had to look it up. It says Lashkargah.
Lashkargah. It's just outside of Lashkargah. Kala E Bust is amazing. It has this amazing arch. The arch is now bricked up, unfortunately, but there's a very famous photo of like a camel being like put, you know, with goods on going underneath the arch. Yeah, it's iconic. It's amazing. Lashkargah would be something that would, I mean, Kala E Bust would be something that would be more practical than Minaret of Jam, because you can fly to Lashkargah from Kabul. You can fly to Lashkargah. You can do kind of how we work in Kandahar, which is that we fly in the afternoon. We go straight to the accommodation, stay in the accommodation overnight. Then we pack up, check out, do our sightseeing in the day, and then go straight to the airport. So if you are kind of seen, followed, whatever, when you're out and about, they can follow you to the airport and then you're gone. So there's that. So Kala E Bust, we've not taken anyone there, but it would be something we could certainly do. I mean, I know people have been there. I know a couple of I know freelance journalists, development workers that have gone to Lashkargah. I know accommodation would be secure there. We could make it happen. Like most things in life, if people throw enough money at it, we can make it happen. So certainly Kala E Bust is more likely than the Minaret of Jam. The Minaret of Jam would be, yeah, it's just so remote. You're extremely exposed.
And so Bamiyan, a little more comment on the itineraries, fly, drive.
Bamiyan. I mean, the main Bamiyan Valley has not had an insurgency incident since the international community came to Afghanistan like nearly 20 years ago, which is more than we can say for bloody London or most cities in the world. So Bamiyan itself, they said that's where we had the Marathon of Afghanistan. So you can imagine, like last year, we had 750 runners across the 10-kilometer race and the marathon race, half of which were women. That included like 30 international people. So you can imagine, you're in Afghanistan, you've got international people and women and everything running for 6-7 hours. You can imagine the security situation has to be pretty solid to be able to do that. To drive between Bamiyan and Kabul, there's just no real reason why you would want to do it. There have been illegal checkpoints by anti-government groups on both of the roads. There's two main roads between Kabul and Bamiyan. That's been the case for the last decade, basically. And no international. Oh no, that's not true. A while back, like this must be 8 or 9 years ago, a journalist was stopped, and the Taliban, or whoever the anti-government group were, we assume it was the Taliban. They took all his cameras, but they let him go. I know some international people drive there. I know other guides are like, yeah, we're happy to drive you there. But for us, it's just there's just no point. There are flights, well, there were before COVID, between Bamiyan and Kabul. So why drive? It doesn't make any sense to save a small amount of money, and not only risk the life of the guest, but not only the life of the guest, but also the local guys, the driver, also the people in Bamiyan who make money from tourism. You know, the ski guides that are out
That's
there.
a wonderful point.
Those, yeah, those guys are out there as well. So if people die in, on the way to Bamiyan, Bamiyan gets associated with this death. I mean, it affects them as well. So I think, yeah, people have to assess why they would take that route if they're going to save themselves like $100.
Yeah, I remember for my trip, the flight schedules didn't work, so it wasn't possible. But I was just discussing with the guide, learning about the situation, and he's like, "Yeah, he'd taken the road for family reasons before, but he's like, you have to go really early and hope that like he said, like the snipers are sleeping in that morning." And I was like, that's a
Yeah, you do it. Look, I mean, in the last decade, I've taken that road maybe half a dozen times because, yeah, the flights are incredibly. I mean, it's like you could write a 500-page book on the flights between Kabul and Bamiyan and the various different things that have happened. The planes getting stuck in the mud and they're also having to push them out. The two planes at Bamiyan Airport, when they first started, there was a UN plane and a commercial plane, and the commercial plane crashed into the UN plane when it taxied in. You can imagine that. There's two planes at the airport and they hit each other. I
I had
mean,
that with French pilots on I think it was Guadeloupe that
There was one politician from Bamiyan. He was late for his flight from Kabul to Bamiyan, so they didn't let him board, and all his supporters came out onto the runway in Bamiyan and didn't let the plane land, and it had to turn back to Kabul, and there were no flights for a week. So I mean that route is like anything can happen. So yeah, I mean I've taken and that's basically what you do is there are times of the day when you're going to be. I'm not going to say what time of the day. You've already said it, but there are times of the day. And ways of traveling which are going to make you less obvious because everyone says, yeah, generally with these illegal checkpoints, especially in somewhere like that Bamiyan road, they don't control the road the whole time. They come down with an illegal checkpoint, they stop a few cars, check some IDs, and then disappear. So they'll watch the road and then they'll radio ahead to come in. So there are ways to make yourself less conspicuous. Definitely everybody has to go to the toilet before they drive off. You're not going to stop halfway and get out.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's just ways of like the vehicles you have, how you dress people, which positions they sit in, the times of day that you drive, times of day, so that when you go through the bit which is the highest risk bit, you pass that at a certain time of day. Maybe you send a car ahead in advance, and if there is some problem, there is a checkpoint they can turn around or they can call you, or they can send you a message. There's a few things you can do again to kind of reduce that risk. But that's like if we absolutely have to get people between Bamiyan and Kabul, not as a standard thing. If we're taking 100 people a year between those two cities, you don't want to be driving there the whole time.
And one thing I've really appreciated with the correspondence you and I have had over the years, say with some other countries, like when I was looking at different options for Syria, you laid out every possible option, including ones that I would not be allowed back into my home country. Saying it in jest, but being systematic and saying that these are all the different ways that people
we're
can
going
go.
to Syria. Yeah. Like, yeah. I'm like, I mean, you could have joined up with ISIS. I mean, I was like, oh no, but like. You have to look at like
some are one-way options or practically one way, but I just feel like for somebody who's interested in, well, let's focus on Afghanistan, and several recent guests, say on Rick's podcast, Counting Countries, have talked about they just showed up and couch surfed around Afghanistan, and to me that I just can't put myself in those shoes. Maybe I'm already too old, but how do you, as a traveler, you're hearing all of these voices. How do you begin to sort through that and make an informed decision for yourself about, is it couch surfing on one extreme? Is it going low key with an agency that operates more like a local? Is it going the full white SUV gun-toting guys, all these different levels and approaches to travel a region or country that's often in flux.
Um, well, I mean, there's a few questions in there. If you're talking about a difference between a low profile kind of way of traveling and a, having sort of close protection and armed security, um, for us, that very much depends on what the risks are. And I think that to say one is better than the other, like overall, is just not true, because it's
Mhm.
not, you work in certain ways to reduce the risk, and sometimes one will increase a risk and one will reduce the risk. So, for example, when we're in the cities that we travel to in Afghanistan, we don't have armed protection, because we see the risk from anti-government groups as they are sort of planned attacks. They're planned attacks against predetermined targets, and therefore, what we're best to do is make sure we're not one of those targets, and we spend as little amount of time as possible at those targets to reduce that risk. There isn't really that much in Afghanistan of a opportunist attacks in the cities. Outside the cities is different because you've got those illegal checkpoints, as I discussed, but in the cities, not so much. So all you're going to do by having a armed security is attracting attention. So therefore, we pick out very much the accommodation we stay in. We dress most of our guests in local clothing. We have, as you know, 95% of cars in Afghanistan are Toyotas, so we either have Corollas or we have highest vans. And so we're not making our guests invisible, but we make sure that maybe from 100 meters away, they can't necessarily see it. Move away to Mogadishu, there is a high risk of opportunist attacks, and therefore, and you're not going to blend in. People are going to be able to see you, Stefan, around a corner from 150 meters away in Mogadishu.
But I'm from Minnesota, and that's one of the few
Exactly,
places in the
they're
world
gonna
they
see
welcome me.
you. So therefore, and there's a risk of opportunist attack. There's armed people who would just be like, oh, I'm gonna rob that
Mhm.
guy, whatever. So therefore, having the armed security is the way to go. So it's not that one is better than the other. It's like horses for courses. You choose what's going to be best for those situations. As far as couch surfing in Afghanistan is concerned, I mean, I know some of the people that the hosts, the couch surfing hosts in Afghanistan. So I mean, I'd be cool with it, and I'll be cool with it because I know them. So it's a hard question to state. I mean, I think look, there's two things with the the way that you can use couch surfing. On one hand, you have got the reviews. You know that whoever this person is has hosted before, has sent some reviews. They haven't kidnapped them. They haven't killed them. It's out there. It's you can review them, but on the flip side, it means that information is available to other people as well. That information is available. If I'm someone from the Taliban, I can go onto couch surfing. I
Mhm.
can check out these guys' profiles. I can set up a fake profile and do various things. So um, I, I don't think it's on the radar of most anti-government groups in Afghanistan to set up fake couch surfing. Their priority is not really about the odd traveller that comes in.
Mhm.
However, I mean, ISIS is a different story. They pretty much want to kill anyone. They'd be up for it if they decided to. I don't know. I can't say. There's obviously a risk there because there's a huge unknown.
Mhm.
There's an unknown for the person going in. But then again, for a lot of people going to Afghanistan, whether they're traveling with me, whether they're traveling on couch surfing, whether they're traveling with a local guide, another company, there's a huge amount of an unknown anyway. So for me to say, like, I'm asking someone to trust me and say, like,
Mhm.
take a
Sure.
risk. Honestly, we look after, we will look after you and try and explain that. So, but people are taking a leap of faith with us. So they're probably taking a leap of faith um, with couch surfing as well. I mean, the first time I traveled to Afghanistan, I just traveled independently. That was in 2007. And so I'm probably not the best person to talk to about like the risks I might take for myself are maybe slightly different to what I would, well, definitely different to what I would do with Untamed Borders.
Is there a particular trip that comes to mind that you want to, but you would not take for yourself in the current time, assuming setting aside virus stuff?
Oh man, there's loads of I mean, there's a bunch of like desert forts in Nimruz province in like the far southwest of Afghanistan. There's a friend of mine. We've always talked about. Well, he's always talked about, and I said if he did it, I'd join him. We'd just cross the border from Iran with our own vehicle and go and check all that stuff out. But it's just, I mean, and this Jebel Mara in Darfur. So um, so yeah, the with so yeah, the stuff that I've always kind of wanted to do, and sometimes I get around to doing it, and often I'm lucky I end up getting to do it for work, so it's amazing.
And Kevin Bryan is asking permission to cross back to Tajikistan from Aktashtak and at the end of the walk-on. And is it possible? He's talked to friends on the Aga Khan side trying to put it together, but still early. And then he had a follow-up where in Central Asia is a must visit that's lesser known.
Oh God, they've been talking about that border crossing. I don't know. I mean, for people who are reasonably familiar with the geography, um, there's a very thin strip of Afghanistan that points out in the northwest of the country. The thinnest of that strip is the Wakhan corridor. Half of that's in Tajikistan and half's in Afghanistan, and then it opens out into the Afghan Pamir. And the border crossing between Tajikistan is at the. I mean, if Afghanistan, oh, how are we doing this here? Looks a bit like that, really. And this is the Wakhan corridor. The border crossing is here in Ishkashin. So if you want to go up to the Afghan Pamir, which is really cool, you cross here, you take 2 days drive, you trek around here. So he's asking if you could cross back into Tajikistan up this way. And the answer is they've been talking about it for about 20 years. And they've been saying, oh yeah, next year it will be open. Like we're working on it. So maybe it's right. Maybe it will be fine after COVID, but it's not. There is a bridge there. There is a possibility to cross, and I know that in the early 2000s there was a team that were allowed to cross back out there very early in the sort of tourism days, and when we've done some of our risk assessments and said that if it does for various reasons, if we can't travel back to that border crossing, how would we get out of Afghanistan? That crossing, it would, there's a possibility that crossing would be opened in an emergency. If you could not go back to the.
Is this something that it's open to locals, or it's totally closed?
Locals do cross there. It's not. I don't really know. They do cross there, and they do cross on the further up as well near Lake Chakmaktin. They cross by. They cross over there, but I'm not sure. I'm not actually sure. I don't do our kind of trekking trips up there because until recently I always need to be quite sort of close to a laptop. But Aid or Matt would know.
But you do offer a walk-on trip.
Oh yeah. We do stuff up there all the time.
And talk about the region for those that have maybe just heard the name as some kind of out of the history books or a romantic idea of the region. What can you do? What does a trip there look like?
Well, the if we look at the map of where we do, if we look at the map of Afghanistan, the reason that strip is there, the very top end of it stretches into China, and above it is Tajikistan, which used to be part of the Russian Empire, and below it is Pakistan, which used to be part of the British Empire. And when the British and the Russians decided to fix the borders of Afghanistan in the late 19th century, they didn't want their empires to touch. So they created this thin strip of land that was Afghanistan. The people there didn't have they were just told, now you're part of Afghanistan. So this thin strip of land separates Tajikistan from Pakistan. So that's why it exists. And under the Soviet times, with all the collectivization, at the very tip of the Wakhan corridor are Kyrgyz nomadic people. So
Mm,
there was all of the Kyrgyz in Kyrgyzstan and in southern and in western Tajikistan are kind of semi-nomadic because they kind of became Soviet citizens and you weren't supposed to be
mhm,
fully nomadic. But the only true Kyrgyz nomadic are in Afghanistan at the very tip there. And during the 1980s, when there was the war during the Cold War, half of them moved to the Anatolian Plateau in Turkey. They had a big discussion about
mm,
whether they were going to go. The Americans were going to put them in Alaska,
mm.
but officially America wasn't involved in the war in Afghanistan, so it was a bit of a political act. So in the end, half of them have moved to the Anatolian Plateau in Turkey, and the other half decided to stay. There's a number of documentaries about um, the Kyrgyz, and they live at about 4,000 meters in altitude. It can snow there in July. It's a pretty rough part of the world to live in.
That leads me to Matthew Allison's question talking about snow. Yamal Peninsula to see the Nanette reindeer herders. Do you still take people?
We haven't done it for a number of years, and we, as I mean, Untamed Borders sort of started in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then you know for various reasons, sort of expanded into other areas. And we've done a number of trips in the North Caucasus, in Chechnya and Dagestan back in 2012. And someone approached me to say they knew how to get these permits to the Yamal Peninsula, which is quite difficult to get permits to because it's a really big oil producing area. And the Nenets reindeer herders live there. And the Nenets are quite remarkable. They have this almost symbiotic relationship with the reindeers. And they migrate in the winter and summer up and down the Yamal Peninsula every 3 or 4 days, taking down their tents, which I've forgotten the name of, and packing everything up into sleighs, lassoing a couple of reindeer, and then moving on. And we were like, this is going to be amazing. We're going to have a trip that, like a group trip that will like live with the Nennet reindeers for 5 or 6 days, and they'll do at least one movement. So it was a long train ride. It was a 2 day train ride to Salakad, and then a chum. Very good, thank you, Matthew. The That's the name of the tent, the traditional tent. To Salakad, and then back of the snowmobiles out to where we'd meet them, and then live with them. And we'd said like we couldn't have too many people, so I think we had a maximum of 5. I think the first group we had was 4 people, but even then it was almost a bit too sort of intrusive. And because of needing the guide, the length of time it had to be, it ended up being kind of a long train ride, a really long journey to live for a fairly short time with the Nenets. And it's pretty rough, and it was fairly expensive. And also, I mean, it didn't help that the first trip the guide and one of the guests got sort of drunk on the train. The guest wandered off out the train. The guide went after him, and then one of the other guests, who she said she wasn't drunk, got off the train to look for them, and then the train left. And so she was left without her passport or any money or any real clothes in the middle of winter in above, like, no, not quite above the Arctic Circle, but fairly close to it. And the train like left. And that's obviously pretty bad as a company for that to happen. But fortunately, I think there were like taxi drivers at these small. I mean, if for everyone that's traveled, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people in this group have traveled by train in Russia. They stop for a long time in the stations, don't they? It's not like you stop, people get on. Like often at the stations, it's a 5-10 minute, sometimes 15-minute stop. And I think drunk people missing their train, like going out to maybe buy something at the like kiosk and not getting back on the train, is not an unusual thing, because a taxi driver bundled her into the taxi and then just hooned it, because all the roads in that part of Russia, they're next to the track,
Okay.
overtook the train and managed to get her back on the next time. So it wasn't an auspicious start. So we did a few private trips after that, and then it just didn't kind of happen. Sometimes you start organizing trips to somewhere, and it kind of takes off, it captures people's imagination, they tell their friends and they like it. And other times we do trips and just doesn't sort of go anywhere. So we haven't done a trip to the Nenets for a while, but that's not because it's really awesome. It's just I mean, a trip has to be awesome, but also people have got to want to do it.
talk a little bit about that, running a business during a period of effectively no travel. What are you doing to cope, to plan, to strategize? What's your outlook?
Oh, it's really easy. We've not got much to do. It's very easy running a business when there's no travel. Um, yeah, I mean, look, it's not great. It's not the best time for yeah, for income when you're organizing travel. Um, but look, I mean, nobody expected it to be quite like this. I mean, we kind of knew that in February things were going to be bad for a while. We didn't expect it to be quite like this. And I mean, look, thankfully we've got a lot of people that like us, that trust us, and that really want to go to the places that we're guiding. So a lot of the trips, the group trips and the private trips that are already planned, like Jaimo, who messaged in, um, you know, the money that we've been paid for that has just been moved forward to when we're going to be able to travel again. And so that's safe with us. As a UK-based travel company, we have to comply with the sort of EU regulations on that. So the money that people give us, we're not allowed to actually spend that until the trip is run. So it's all our guest money is sort of sitting in the bank. As far as me and the team are concerned in the UK, we're all kind of just doing something else until we can travel again. I mean, I'm answering emails and doing a bit of social media and stuff like that. And we'll be ready to go again when it starts again. I mean, to be honest, I mean it's tougher for everyone we work with in the countries we guide in. I mean, a lot of the countries we guide in are the least able to deal with an epidemic like this for numerous reasons. And we just don't know how it's going to affect places like Afghanistan or South Sudan or Somalia. I mean, look, somewhere like South Sudan has more vice presidents than it has ventilators. I mean, there's a stat for you.
Yeah.
So we don't know. I mean, on the flip side, one of the mitigating factors is that, you know, Somalia, South Sudan, Afghanistan, their over 65 population is about 2.5%, whereas in Europe it's about 20%. There's the possibility that there just aren't the same number of vulnerable people who are the most affected by COVID because they just don't exist in a lot of these countries because it's so tough. But we don't know. I know it's going to be tough for a lot of those guys. So it's just trying to be how we can kind of help them out a bit until we can start working again.
Well, let's close on something positive. I believe in the region, Pakistan is where maybe I could say you fell in love with travel in the region that let you on this career. And let's say good times. What is the ultimate spend enough time to get to multiple regions Pakistan trip that you recommend for the ambitious traveler? And I'm going to step away for about 20 seconds because daily life is intruding, and I'll be right back.
Go for it. Well, Stefan, I'm actually putting together a guy. He's a photographer, and he usually spends a lot of time in India, and he just wants to cover, you know, all of Pakistan, take a lot of portraits, and we're putting together like a 45-day trip for him because, you know, Pakistan's a country of 200 million people. It's the length of the Indus. So if you're saying what's the length of time to see Pakistan, we're struggling to trim it down to 45 days for this guy who wants to see everything and photograph everything. Because by the time you visited all the UNESCO sites, visited the old cities of Peshawar and Lahore and Multan and Bahawalpur, by the time you've gone up to Chitral and seen the pagan Kalasha people, by the time you've crossed over and crisscrossed the north and gone to Hunza, the Kundra Pass, the highest paved international border crossing in the world, gone to Skardu, gone to Fairy Meadows, that's, you know, explored the north, gone to Swat, and then traveled down through the Punjab and Sindh. That's a lot of stuff. And he still hasn't even seen the mountain in Baluchistan that we put on our Instagram post today that looks exactly like a silhouette of Donald Trump. He won't even have seen that in 45 days. So there's a lot to see. No, there is a lot to see in Pakistan. I mean, it's a big place.
Fantastic. Well, I certainly want a much longer trip. I don't know when I'll swing the 45 days, but I'll dream of it and hope that I can make that trip and then that we're all able to get back on the road soon. Thank you for joining us tonight, James.
You're welcome.